Reading a book called The Rise of Christianity by a guy named Ronald Starks, sociologist and sort of a historian. And he's trying to ask the question, why did Christianity succeed in the Roman Empire? Why was it in particular, he says, well, this is so interesting to me, why in particular, he said, from about a 100-year period, did Christianity go from being about 8 to 6% of the empire to almost 50%? There were two great plagues that went through the Roman Empire in the first couple of centuries after Christ. The first one came through 165 and lasted for about 15 years. The second one came through 251 AD and lasted for about 15 years. We don't really know exactly what it was, but here's what we know. It was absolutely devastating, particularly in the cities. It was so devastating that we know during the height of the second plague, 5,000 people a day, 35,000 people a week were dying in Rome. Back in the days when Rome itself couldn't have been more than 1 million people. Think about that. 35,000 people a day. In both cases, maybe 25 to 30% of the whole population of the Roman Empire was wiped out during these plagues. Now, the Greeks, the Romans, the pagan majority, the people of those days, did not have any idea how to cure these things and didn't have any idea about the source of these things, but they did know one thing. They were spread through contact. They knew that. They knew you caught it through contact. And as a result, the rich and, get this, the doctors got out of cities. They got out of cities. And we know that there's an awful lot of accounts of even families, when they saw a family member really getting very, very sick, that they would abandon the family member. They left one another. They left the sick. They left the sick in droves. They left the cities in droves, but not the Christians. What the Christians did was they stayed in the cities, and not only did they care for their own sick, but they had dynamic nursing services, and they went out and they brought in and they cared for all sorts of the pagan sick. And as a result, many, many of them died. We've got reports about this. Why the difference? Oh, the difference is pretty obvious, is it not? Pagan people, by their worldview, had two things that Christians were very different from the way Christians looked at the world. First of all, pagans had absolutely no assurance that there was an afterlife or that there was anything good about it. They had no assurance of salvation. And Christians knew that this world, as wonderful as it is just a prelude for something. They knew that death could do nothing but translate them into glory. He talks about one of the doctors, a guy named Galen, who documented the first plague. And we have a lot of his writings. But Galen left the cities. He didn't treat anybody because he knew if he treated people, he would die. Now, Galen, for him to have remained in Rome, to treat the afflicted would have required bravery far beyond that which was needed by Christians to do the same thing. Now, here's what the historian is saying. He's being objective. He is not saying, weren't Christians more courageous? No, he says, it was rational for Christians to stay. It was rational for pagans to flee. The Christians had the gospel. And the gospel took very ordinary people and gave them a reason for staying put. He says, we're pretty sure of this. The people that have the plague, if you just took care of them, if you just cared for them, just fed them, just gave them food, just gave them drink, just gave them warmth, just took care of them, 50% of the sick would probably recover. When you abandon someone, of course, the death rate would be much greater. And therefore, because Christians did not abandon each other, because they weren't afraid, because they believed in glory, therefore, Christians, almost for sure, their death rate would have been only 1/3 what the pagans were. So during those two 15-year periods, Christians, their growth rate would have gone 3 or 4 times greater than the population of the pagans around them. But more than that, thousands and thousands and thousands of pagans would have had Christians to thank for their life. Now, they looked at glory. They did it for the sake of glory.